fund with some of those concerns top of mind?
Sure. Well, I mean, the economy definitely has some bright spots right now that we're focusing on. Payroll growth has been strong over the last several months. The housing market's starting to recover. It's creating higher household net worth, and it's picking up residential construction. But there are some headwinds that are pushing against those tailwinds, primarily the fiscal consolidation that's in order for this year. So sequestration cuts, we think, are going to be worth about 60 basis points drag on growth this year. And the all the tax increases that came along the way, the payroll tax cut increase of 2%, the higher marginal tax bracket of 39.6, that's probably worth another percent. So while there's some bright spots in the economy, there's about a 1.5% drag that we're likely to see this year from fiscal consolidation. And so that's likely to keep overall GDP this year not that much better than the last few years, maybe somewhere in the mid-twos, but not enough to take the Fed out of the equation. We think the Fed is likely to stay involved in the fixed income markets. Maybe they taper off purchases much later in the process, maybe towards the end of the year if growth really picks up. But we think sort of in the near term, until we see what the full effects of the sequestration cuts are going to be, growth's likely to be stable and the Fed's likely to stay in play.
Franco, does that mean any worries out there about a bond bubble or overdone?
You know, the idea of a bond bubble is, it's tricky. I mean, there are reasons for rates to be where they are. This is what the Fed has been, it's sort of been one of the Fed's main talking points. You know, it takes a long time to recover from the type of financial crisis that we saw in this country. Growth has been really just sort of moderate. There hasn't been a real breakout in growth. And the Fed obviously is in play, and that's kept rates subdued. But, you know, to really get a sharp higher move in rates like what we saw in 1994 maybe, you really need to see a significant pickup in the labor market. And really, with the idea of fiscal government starting a consolidation process, that's hard to imagine right now.
Franco, I want to talk about your fund itself. You're obviously beating your peers. You're beating your benchmark. You hold a lot of mortgage debt. Recently, you had about 17% of your holdings in CMOs, another 14% in MBS pass-throughs. Do you expect to add to those holdings this year? And how are those securities helping your fund outperform?
Sure. Well, we're at the higher end of our historical weightings in MBS for a number of reasons. They've really been a terrific alternative to holding traditional treasuries. In the case of Fannie and Freddie, they're near treasury quality. They have a strong implicit backing of the U.S. government. They've been receiving financial support for several years for the government. And in the case of Ginnie Mae, they're explicitly guaranteed by the government. The trick with MBS is they can offer additional, in some cases, significant additional yield above and beyond traditional treasuries because they come with an additional risk over treasuries, which is prepayment risk. Most of the sector trades well above par, and the securities are prepayable at any time from the underlying borrowers. So it really takes a careful eye and a dedicated research process to be able to pick through the millions of securities that this sector offers and look for bonds that have alpha potential above treasuries. And we feel like we do that really well here. On top of that, the sector has benefited from the Fed support. So they've been using mortgages as part of their quantitative easing program for several years now. They're still using them, and we expect that to continue for the medium term.
Franco, in terms of your actual U.S. Treasury holdings, every bond investor wants to know how to play the curve. They're trying to squeeze a little bit of return out of Treasuries, which is hard to do. So where do you find the most value on the curve? How do you handle that?
You know, the way we've handled duration and curve management in this fund, it's been, there's two core principles we've used. First is that we've tried to have a truth in advertising approach with this fund. Our clients are buying a fund that's benchmarked versus the 1 to 10 year part of the Treasury curve. They're expecting to get exposure to that part of the curve. So we've been very careful not to get significantly away from the broader market exposure and kept our duration roughly in line in the index and kept our curve positioning roughly in line with the index for that matter. Secondly, as I already alluded to, there really hasn't been a reason to get wildly different positioning than the market in terms of duration because of the state of the economy and what we thought was likely coming out of the Fed. Rates were likely, coming out of the fiscal crisis, rates were likely to stay low and range bound, and they have. And the Fed was likely to continue to support the Treasury and mortgage markets.